Hi, my name is Rick Vance. I'm the director for the Center for Men's Ministries at the General Commission on United Methodist Men. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today the Chief Executive Officer of the YWCA of Middle Tennessee and the Chief Executive Officer of the General Commission on United Methodist Men.
Thank you. My name is Sharon Roberson. I'm President and CEO of the YWCA Nashville, Middle Tennessee. I want to thank you for participating in the Amending Through Faith movement. I too am a person of faith, and I trust that your faith will help us move our community forward in what is an essential mission. I thank you.
My name is Gil Hanke, and I'm the CEO of the General Commission on United Methodist Men. I too want to welcome you to this. This has been a journey between the YWCA and the General Commission on United Methodist Men for several years to put all this together. It has had some bumps, but it's had lots of support and excitement, and we're just glad that you're part of it. So if there's we are very excited that this is something that's going to change to make not just Nashville and Middle Tennessee the safest place for girls and for women, but also that it will make the area around your church and your community the safest place for women and girls. God bless you.
Thank you both for being here today. Just a reminder that if you have any questions along the journey of amending through faith, attached to this video and attached to the materials that you have received are contact information for the YWCA of Middle Tennessee and also the General Commission. God bless you. Enjoy your journey.
Greetings. My name is Gil Hanke, and I'm the General Secretary, CEO of the General Commission on United Methodist Men in Nashville, Tennessee.
And I'm Rick Vance. I'm the director for the Center of Men's Ministries at the General Commission. It's great to be with you today.
Our purpose in doing this is to give you some guidance and some advice as you move forward to begin your work with the curriculum that we have on a Men Together in Faith. We're going to talk about the basic components of what we'll discuss today. Why this study, what the study is all about, how to fail at this, to review all the study materials, how to facilitate the training. We're going to review each one of the sessions, particularly session 5, but on each one of those as to give you some suggestions as you prepare to teach. And then the conclusion of the study, which also includes a survey and your next steps and the group's next steps in using this material effectively. Let me tell you what this is not. This is not a tool to fix people. This is not a place for people who are abusive. This is quite different. This is a place for people who want to change the culture that we find ourselves in. It is also not a place that is a class that is taught that involves men and women. There is one session that a woman may help facilitate, but this is something that is specific to men, and men do better when they discuss this among themselves. And it's not a place for children. We're going to talk about some pretty graphic things, and you're going to hear some pretty graphic language from time to time in some of the videos that you're going to watch. So this is not something that you want an elementary school or even middle school child to participate in. Now, first of all, let me tell you how you can mess this up. If you don't want this to work, here are 10 easy steps. And this is inspired by Kevin Watson's book called The Class Meeting. Some people, when faced with something that they want to do that they really don't want to do, will begin to study it and discuss it and come up with charts and all kinds of stuff about it, and they never really begin. So if you're going to waste time doing that, please don't. But if you don't ever begin, it's not going to be successful. One of the most damaging things that you can do in any group is meet irregularly. So if Bob doesn't know that you're going to meet on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, he's not sure that you're going to have a meeting that week, he's not going to come. And if Bob doesn't come, Ralph doesn't come, John doesn't come, and the whole thing falls apart. So set a meeting, meet regularly. You can also make this fail by turning this into a different kind of meeting. To combine it with something else. You can also fail if you turn this into an intense accountability group about your personal relationship with women and struggles you've had. You can also make this fail by selecting the wrong kind of leader, a leader that doesn't have any spiritual maturity, that isn't a servant leader. You can also make sure this fails by allowing one person to dominate that meeting. You can also be sure this fails by yourself or someone in the group that always has all the answers. There's a lot of discussion. You're going to find a lot of discussion as we do this. So be careful of that. You can also fail the group by allowing people to hide, where they're not communicating, they're not participating, they're just a wallflower, and you want everyone to participate. And in our experience, that's not been a problem, but it can be if you're not careful. Some people might be attracted to this because, man, we're going to talk about domestic violence, and we're going to talk about all this stuff that has to do with, sex and assault and all this exciting stuff. What a great place to pick up some good gossip. Well, that's not the point either. So we'll cross that off the list. And lastly, everything we do at the Commission, every teaching we do, whether it's in men's ministry or scouting ministry, but particularly in this, we want to change behaviors. And so if there are people who are not going to change, who are not going to be, not going to grow, who are not going to allow themselves to be challenged by God's grace, then that's not a group that's going to get the maximum out of this particular curriculum. So what you're going to need, and what you have in the combo pack, is a facilitator's manual, which is on a jump drive. You have participants manuals, which are in a booklet form. You're going to need a computer, and you're going to need some way to project that computer or have a large screen that you are going to plug into so everyone can see it. The reason the facilitator's manual is on the jump drive is also on that jump drive is all the links to all the videos that you're going to show and some other material as well. So that's why we've decided to do it that way. It also is helpful for us because we're going to update this as we need to, and that will be easy because we'll just send you a way of downloading a new jump drive to get the newer material when that comes around in a year or two.
So each of the sessions is about an hour and a half or 90 minutes in length. The curriculum consists of 8 of those sessions. Each session will include activities, discussions, a theological framework discussion, and then we'll conclude with a weekly challenge. As you can see from all of the sessions, we'll be dealing with a variety of issues that affect domestic violence, and not just talk about violence in itself, but rather many of the things that affect and cause domestic violence. During the activities, we ask that you would try to encourage people to be engaged as well in the discussions. The theological frameworks are basic, broad brushstrokes that cover the theological assumptions for each of the discussions. And then the weekly challenges will encourage the participants to take what they have learned and some of the insights that they have gained and share those, or actually use them during that week. As Gil mentioned, one of the things that is important is that we engage all of the participants in the discussions throughout the 90-minute sessions. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is to set a covenant agreement with each other that you will go for approximately 90 minutes. If you see that at the end of 90 minutes you are not complete, then discuss as a group what the next step is. Also, the curriculum in the facilitator's manual contains a lot of material. It's not intended that you would use all of the materials in each of the sections, but it is important that you cover each of the sections.
One of the things that we want to add is, as you set up the group, you may set that up with men who all know each other and all are from the same church. But you can also open this up to other churches, other men in other men's groups, and serve it as a community. That has some advantages, actually, because it keeps people focused particularly on the material that is being presented and not anything that may be going on as a sideline in your local church. So consider that. Don't think small. Think inclusive. And basically, most of the sessions will be taught to probably around 10, don't you think, Rick? About 10 people would be a maximum number that you'd want at a time.
I think the group should probably be about 8 to 10 members. The combo pack comes with 8 booklets for that purpose. The other thing is that the environment is very important as you set up that space. Make sure that it is a place where confidential conversation can occur with a minimal opportunity that you might be interrupted. And also, this curriculum has been piloted as a webinar-based training session, so that we have actually developed a workspace on an internet video conference and allowed the participants to participate that way, and it has been very, very effective. We have several expectations for the facilitators. We ask that you be receptive to the content of the lessons, keep an open mind. Some of the material as you review it will be challenging for you, but we do want you to keep an open mind and be receptive to that content. Facilitators should also be open to changing their own views on masculinity and violence. We found in the pilot groups that some of our facilitators, their thought process around what being a true man is, and also the issues that influence violence against women, changed during the length of the course. So be open to that, and know that if you need to have any conversation with folks, we at the Commission or we at the YWCA would be willing to have that conversation with you. Also understand, facilitators, that you don't need to be experts. Just be confident in your training, in your ability to use the materials, and be good trainers and leaders. All the material that is in the facilitator's manual will lead you and guide you with all the factual materials. You just need to use your skills as a good facilitator. We ask that you become very familiar and comfortable with the materials. This material is new for many people, so it's very important for you to review the materials and at least have an understanding where in the facilitator's manual the sessions are and the material is, and the resource materials can be found. You'll be asked some questions probably during your sessions, and it's okay for you to say, I'm not sure I can get that information. Don't just try to come up with an answer. And finally, we ask that you would provide timely feedback to your participants, but also to us. If there's something that just didn't seem to work, although we have tested this in numerous sites across the country, there may be something that didn't seem like it worked for you. And if you send us an email, we'll provide that contact information. That would be helpful for us as we continue to try to make this the most effective document and the most effective program that we can for men throughout the country and around the world. We also have some expectations for our participants. So as you think about the participants that are going to be in your group, and as you meet with the participants the first time, we ask that you would ask them to be consistent in the attendance of their sessions. Each session builds on the next. So it's important for them to make this a commitment that they will be part of each of these sessions. Using a video model for this made it very easy because the persons did not have to leave their home, or if they were traveling during the period, were able to connect for the 90-minute session from wherever they were. With that in mind, if you want to even try doing a session where you're in person and also using a webinar or a video chat, that might be helpful. Encourage the participants to engage in the thoughtful discussion and personal reflection. That will require you to establish some working guidelines as a group about confidentiality and the safety of the space. Help the men understand that the environment that you are building is safe for them and that no comment will be taken lightly. The participants will be asked to complete a weekly challenge. While this may seem trite in some ways, it is important to apply what is learned each week outside of the class session, because when you return the following week, there'll be an opportunity for you to discuss how the weekly challenge went for each of the participants. Challenges require them to consider the lessons and complete assignments and record their thoughts. So encourage them to do that honestly and openly. And then, because there is the theological perspective of this course, and that's what makes this course probably more unique than many others, is that this is biblically based and theologically grounded. Ask the participants to bring a Bible to each session. And if a participant says that they don't have a Bible, that's okay. If they have a phone or a smart tablet or anything of that nature, they actually do have access to a Bible, and you can encourage them to utilize their smartphone or a tablet or something else for the biblical pieces of this course.
They should bring a Bible of their choice. There's not a right translation for this particular work. So they should bring the adaptation of the Bible that they're most comfortable with.
So let's quickly jump into the sessions. For each of the sessions, we're going to kind of talk about what's covered in each of those sessions, and then very quickly give you some insight on what we found useful and what others have found useful during the pilot. So in session 1, we're going to be doing the introduction and talking about the problem of violence against women. The opening activity is introduce yourself, and this gives persons an opportunity to really just get to know each other. Now, if all of the participants are from one local church, that activity may go actually fairly quickly. But it's been our experience that in doing mixed groups from the community, or one of our groups was actually from participants around the country on a video conference, that activity took a little bit longer because none of the participants actually knew each other. Then there is an introduction to the curriculum that you as a facilitator will do and be guided through, and what the Amend Together program is. The Amend Together program is an initiative of the YWCA of Middle Tennessee, and it is a program that is intended to make the Middle Tennessee area the safest place for women and girls in the country. A little bit later, we'll tell you how we believe that we are adapting that vision for us here at the Commission, but also with the Amending Through Faith program. The first video that you're going to watch is a TED Talk by Jackson Katz called Violence Against Women. It's a men's issue. If I'm not mistaken, Gil, I think this is the longest of all of our videos.
Yes, it is.
And it will kind of set the framework and the groundwork for everything else that's going to be accomplished during the next 8 sessions. We're going to be talking in this session about the statistics and the definition of violence against women. We're also going to be talking about a variety of forms of violence, and we're going to be using something called the power and control wheel and the equality wheel. Now, these wheels can be a little bit confusing at first and will be used a couple times during this training workshop. So it's important for this session to just simply read through, help explain any confusion that might be there. But I would encourage you not to spend a great deal of time trying to dissect the wheels at this point. You'll have opportunities to use the wheels throughout the other sessions. The theological framework is the biblical perspective of power, control, and equality that's found in Scripture. And it looks at both positive and negative aspects of power, control, and equality, and also the concept of contextualization. Simply put, contextualization is taking Scripture and understanding what the context of the Scripture was at the time that it was lived out in the biblical days, and looking at our society and our time and making appropriate connections of what was being said in Scripture. The activity for this session is healthy and unhealthy and abusive relationship behaviors. And that will look at some scenarios of healthy and unhealthy and abusive activities, and it will encourage the participants to label them and then have an opportunity to have some discussion around that. And then finally, the weekly challenge will be an ask and listen that will open up some dialogue around the issues of domestic violence or violence against women with persons in the participants' community. I'm going to leave the screen up for just a few moments because I think we've covered much of the screen. Again, the one thing about the theological framework and contextualization that I didn't mention is that you probably need to be prepared for some resistance to contextualization. It sounds a little bit strange to persons who may not be familiar with this, but quite frankly, we do contextualization every day of our lives. Session 2 moves into the violence iceberg. Gil, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there are it talks about what the norms are and the shattered glass effect of this. As we mentioned earlier, an iceberg is small above the water and large below the water. And what the example that's given is that there are prejudice attitudes and prejudice acts and discrimination. Those are all under the water. Those are all things that happen that are the basis that turn into violence. And so when we talk about, well, we need to end the violence, we also need to deal with those other components as well. And so, there's some activities that we'll do in that, and how language fuels violence. There's some ways you say things that are that can really escalate and really move to violence fairly quickly. Again, there's a theological framework for this. It talks about, again, cultural norms, which again gets back a little bit into that contextualization. And like each of the other sessions, there is a weekly challenge to find examples that you've seen over the next 5 to 7 days as to where you've seen examples of some of those things in the iceberg. Probably haven't seen violence, but you've probably seen some discrimination and some prejudice acts and some prejudice attitudes. The shattered glass effect is just a way of awakening to the truths of the norms of our society. And it's difficult. It takes some time. It's something that it is an uncomfortable conversation at times. And we've already talked about the iceberg, and we've talked about a little bit about the language. There's no, we've had some discussion in the classes that Rick and I have taught, where this notion that we can write this off as just locker room talk is really not an acceptable answer. And excuse me. And that it is, that there are a lot of things that are said that are common practice that are really insulting and demeaning of women. And then you're going to see, we said last time that the Jackson Cats was the longest, by far the best video in this, one of the more powerful videos is We Are the Lions. Our only, not warning, but just heads up on this is, this has some language in it that, we don't usually use in church and certainly don't use in other settings. But it is consistently appropriate with what the subject is, and it proves the point. It is not used just for an effect. It actually, there's a reason for it, and it'll become clear as you listen to it. If in session 1 and up until this part of session 2, you have people that are wondering what exactly this is all about, this particular video will really knock it out of the park. They will really get it by watching this video.
And if you have participants that don't make the connection, it is probably at this point that you may need to spend just a little bit of time having a discussion about why they don't see those connections occurring. Because probably at that point, there are some issues that maybe they're not bringing up in the session. So as the facilitator, if somebody says, well, I just don't get any of this, that might be an opportunity for you to take just a little bit of one-on-one time with that person and find out if there's something going on.
It talks about language in this session and through the rest of this course that we use as a matter of habit. We don't think about it. We don't think about how, we think about it only from our perspective and not from a woman's perspective. So sometimes it takes a little help to see how that might not reflect well on women.
So as I shared with you, at the beginning of each of our sessions, there is a weekly challenge review. So as the participants begin their session in week 3, we review the challenge from week 2. There is an activity, and then we begin to talk a lot about the man box. The man box is what society says a man looks like. We begin to dissect that. What is true masculinity? What does a man look like? What does a man do? We begin to have a lot of those questions answered. During that conversation, please help the participants understand that there is no incorrect answer, that they are sharing what they've heard and what they feel, and that's okay. We'll have opportunities to have deeper discussion later in this session and actually moving into session 4. One of the activities is about emotions. Most people believe that men are not supposed to show emotion, or if they show emotion, the one emotion that is okay for men is anger or aggression. The question in this activity is which emotions are okay. It begins to look at some of the questions about emotions that men have, and are there truly feminine emotions as opposed to masculine emotions. Emotions and getting out of the man box then begins the conversation of saying, so if this is the aspect, or if this is the expectation society has, and maybe we have, are there things that we need to change? With any change comes anger. All of us experience anger throughout our day. Most people experience some form of anger throughout the day. The question is, where does it go? How do we deal with that? And there is an opportunity to discuss that. And one of the ways that we discuss that is actually through the theological framework for this session, and that is to turn the other cheek. And what exactly does it mean to forgive and to turn the other cheek? The weekly challenge for this session is how do we handle our anger? As I shared with you, when we talk about the men you respect activity, it's important to not criticize or correct a person's appreciation of a stereotypical male. This is just helpful to help you move. This will be helpful to have you move through the rest of the session. Some participants may be reluctant to share about their emotions. What I have found, and I believe Gil could share the same thing, is that men as a whole are more likely to share if you're willing to be vulnerable yourself and share. So it might be okay to say, you know, there are times that I am afraid. There are times that I cry. There are some times that I get mad. All emotions are good. It's how we actually express them and what we do with them. And that moves us into the activity of, so where does anger go? And then finally, there is a video in this session, and we encourage you to have the participants recognize that some adult men feel less comfortable supporting each other emotionally. Why does that happen, and how maybe can we grow through that? In session 4, we're going to continue the conversation about getting out of the man box. There will be a weekly challenge review. And then we're going to talk about what a man's man looks like. Misconceptions about masculinity, the meaning of masculinity. We're going to be talking about men in the Bible. We're going to spend a little bit of time about compartmentalizing. In just a second, I'm going to ask Gil to share a little bit of that to kind of maybe give you a better understanding of what we mean by compartmentalization. And then the weekly challenge is to begin to look at the definition of what a man truly is. Discussion after the man's man activity, misconceptions of masculinity. Participants may claim that they don't feel pressure to exhibit these characteristics. I would encourage you to lovingly and gently challenge them and ask them why they think that, because at least my experience has been that pretty much every man feels a certain amount of pressure to exhibit certain characteristics of what that true, quote unquote, man's man is. And that will lead us into the meaning of masculinity. And just let the participants know that they will not be required to share their responses in this if they don't want to, but encourage them to be open and vulnerable enough to put those responses down on the paper and share as they feel most comfortable.
Okay. I think this is an important lesson in that we talk about these misconceptions that we're uncomfortable with about our maleness. You know, we all don't look like like the superhero and the guy who's got nothing but muscles everywhere and can leap tall buildings with a single bound and is brave and never questions his ability to do anything. And you look at the mirror image of that, and then if there's misconceptions about men, then obviously there's misconceptions about women as well that kind of spark some of the things that we're talking about. Compartmentalizing is sometimes looked at as a skill, but in a way it is really not being authentic. I have a good friend who was a mentor of mine professionally in another field, not in my work with the General Commission, but in another field. He's a great guy and led in ways that was very helpful. But part of his life was a wreck, and it was unprofessional and in some ways unethical. And I was able to compartmentalize very skillfully and said, well, that part of this gentleman's life I'm not going to participate in, and I'm only going to have this relationship based on those things where he's mentoring me professionally and that those are appropriate. that's really not an authentic way of dealing with that gentleman, just like it's not an authentic way for you to deal with other people. So we need to be authentic everywhere. We don't act one way at home and one way at work. We don't act one way when we're mentoring boys and Boy Scouts, and then another way in the community, where when they see that, they see we're living a lie. They see that we're not being a really principled Christian leader as we want to presuppose we are. So it's an important and somewhat difficult, because we do look at it as a skill to get by, but I think it also is a liability that we need to deal with.
Session 5 is how society views women. Now, earlier in our introductions, we told you that there would be one session that having a female voice as part of the group could be helpful, and this is that session. We will begin to talk about what society thinks about women and what roles women play in society. As men, it is easy for us to assume that we have the answers, but my experience, I will just simply share with you, is that they are basically answers that we see from the lens of being a guy. So it's important, I think, to have a woman's voice as part of this session. And I would encourage you to bring the female voice in the meeting at the very beginning, and just have that conversation with them throughout the entire part of, this entire session. Now, I do understand that having a conversation of the weekly challenge review might be a bit uncomfortable with the female present in the room with the guys. And if you think that might be an issue, then I would set aside 5 or 10 minutes at the very beginning for that weekly challenge, and then invite the female facilitator who you've invited to be with you to come maybe 5 minutes later than the session begins, or 10 minutes later than the session begins, so that you can take care of the weekly challenge and then move into the rest of the conversation.
It's probably also appropriate to get permission from the group to have a woman there to assist in this. You certainly don't want to take them by surprise. They don't want to look like they're trapped or something in this. So I just have a real honest conversation about that at the end of the 4th session, and say, how do you want to do this next week? There's this possibility or this possibility. And tell them that we've encouraged you to have a woman, if only if they're comfortable with that.
It's probably going to be around this time that you may have some men who become uncomfortable and defensive, because they may feel as if they are being blamed, or that they are being admonished for someone else's pain. Blame and admonishment is not the aim here. It's rather identification of realities of society, and to be able to understand the true feelings that the other is having. And in this situation, it would be, in most cases, the other being the woman who is experiencing the variety of feelings. None of these 8 sessions is intended to make is intended to make men feel ashamed or guilty for their behavior. Rather, it is intended to open dialogue and create a safer, more peaceful society for all, because we've had the opportunity to discuss the realities, even if we may not see them. So one of the activities is to a man or a woman, and this begins to look at certain traits in certain situations, and whether they're male or female, or masculine or feminine. We talk about microaggressions as mosquito bites and what those types of microaggressions are. We talk about ways that women and girls are over-sexualized in media. We talk about the concept of boys will be boys, or that's just locker room talk. And we have a little bit of conversation about victim blaming. The theological framework for this session is a conversation around mutual respect. And men in this, at the end of this session, are encouraged to have an ask and listen session. And the ask and listen session in this session, session 5, is asking women in their community who they're comfortable having a conversation with what their experiences have been. As I shared with you, you need to be aware for many men, understanding society's harmful treatment of women is difficult. As a facilitator, this session has the most potential for resistance and pushback. Take a deep breath. You've got it. You will survive this. In the activity, there are some obvious answers. If participants appear to be intentionally answering these things in an incorrect way, or maybe just a real simple pat way, then just address it and kind of move on. Microaggressions, as we shared, are those small things that cause harm, that any one thing may not be a problem, but as they begin to mount up, it's kind of like when I was a kid, the phrase was used, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. It is a bunch of cumulative things that mount up that ultimately cause harm. So encourage the participants to ignore the preconceived notions that they may have about microaggressions, and ask the participants to imagine if each microaggression that is talked about in session 5 were committed against them, and shift their point of view to, what if this was me in that situation? How would I have responded? And then finally, the conversation about boys will be boys really drives this home. Teaching women to be safe is important. Teaching boys to not harm women is more important. A woman should never be at fault for rape. And so many times, when society hears about violence against women or girls, they begin to ask some of the questions. How was she dressed? What was she doing? Why was she there? And all of those questions that I know you've heard. They're not appropriate. The victim of violence never asked to have that violence perpetrated against them. It is always the fault of the perpetrator of violence. And this is true whether it's violence of men against women, men against men, women against men, or women against women. No matter what the perpetration of violence is, or who the perpetrator or perpetratee, if you would, are, it is always the one who is causing the violence that should take responsibility. And this conversation in session 5 helps people understand that a little bit better. Gil, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
I think we got it. I think this is an important session, a difficult session, but one that that I think will really bring the group together, and they'll really understand this kind of chronic characterization of women, which is really harmful and causes it will cause men to think about this differently. One of the examples they give is, as a man, do you ever park in a particular place because there's a street light there? And I've never thought about that. Never in my life have I thought about that. But our wives think about that every time they walk the car. Just simple things like that.
Session 6 begins a conversation about healthy communication. How do we communicate? How do we communicate in the world? Goals for communication, how communication and violence are connected, how do we use nonviolent communication? What kind of communication can we use for conflict resolution? We begin a theological discussion about objectification in communication, and we look at some of the media and have conversations around some of the language that's used about the other women in our community, and how the media actually affects that conversation. And in our weekly challenge, we're encouraged to reach communication goals that we set. There are several activities. Communication in your world, we need you to clarify that each example listed, that participants should write how they tend to respond to that type of communicator. And then two is, in part two of that, is to remind them to write both the nature of the unpleasant interaction and the communication style that they use to deal with that. The goals for communication, again, just helps them come up with some ideas and some goals. The conversation about communication and the violence connection highlights the connection between societies discouraging men to express their emotions and men becoming more violent when they can't communicate, and then also really how communication causes violence. And then in the weekly challenge, encourage the men to pay especially good attention to the quote, big question, and you'll see what that is.
Session 7 deals with the bystander effect. And think of a time, it's one of the first activity of when you were in a situation that you realized this was, you saw something that was going the wrong way, and how did you react to that? And we talk about bystanders and the effect they have. And this is a session that encourages the participants to speak up and not be silent. This is not a session that makes you a superhero. This is not, you need to interrupt a violent act. You don't need to, that's not what we're talking about, because you want to interrupt an act before it's violent, and interrupt a behavior before it causes harm. Rick wants me to talk about this because I have a great example of this. In my previous career, I've worked in a rehab program as a speech-language pathologist, and one of the members of our team, we were all equal. We weren't, he wasn't my boss, I wasn't his boss. But every Monday he would come in with the worst, sickest joke, usually sexual in behavior, that he had heard over the weekend. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I just quietly told him one time, I said, please don't ever tell those jokes in front of me again. They're not appropriate. They're not appropriate in this setting, but I can't think of a setting where they are appropriate, because you're demeaning women, and I just don't want to hear it. And so for a while, he would come in and he'd say, oh, I got a great joke for y'all. And when Gil leaves, I'll tell y'all. But eventually the rest of the team said, don't bother. We're not really interested in it either, And so that behavior went away. And so when we speak up against something, when someone makes a crass comment about a woman, about her body, or about what he'd like to do with them, and you say, I'm sorry, I don't think I understand. And they try to explain that, and then you say, I'm sorry, I don't think that makes sense. Or I don't think that's appropriate, or some other phrases that we'll give you in this session. Eventually they get the idea that isn't the behavior of a principled Christian leader, of what a real man in God's definition, in Christ's definition, that's not what we do. So that's the core element of session 7. And there is intervening in private violence. We don't talk about rushing in and doing something, but we do want you to know what some characteristics are of someone who is an abuser and some signs of abuse in victims, because that gives you a framework in which you can say, oh, maybe this is something that needs some assistance in some way. It is one of the things that's happened in my life is some of the people who I have realized have been abused. It surprised me considerably, because I knew both of the husband and the wife, and I was just shocked when this came out. But I didn't have this training. I didn't know the characteristics of an abuser and the signs of abuse in victims. And had I had this training, it would not have been a surprise. The theological framework for this is a cord of three is not easily broken. It's one of the feelings that women in this situation have is that they're alone and that no one understands, and that this has never happened before in the history of mankind, when in fact it is unfortunately a common occurrence. And so to have a sense of community for that person, both for their well-being, their protection, but also to show that there are people who care about them in a very positive and purposeful way that's not abusive, that actually supports them and actually lifts them up.
Oops. So the facilitation tips are here. I think it's most important for you to realize that during this session, we're encouraging the participants not to put themselves at harm, but to help the men understand that their desire to remain part of a cohesive group often stops a man from standing up against a woman. You don't want to step out of the group. It's very uncomfortable to be the one man out, if you would. So as you have these discussions, have a discussion around what it really means to take a positive step for change, to change behavior, even if you're the only one that's doing that. If there's physical violence, continue to stress that a man should never intervene if it's not safe for them to do so. Never put themselves at risk of harm, because quite frankly, when two people are injured, nobody is helped. So helping in the event of physical violence may actually be a step, rather than going and being Superman and stopping the activity, taking their cell phone and dialing 911 and having appropriate law enforcement come to help stop that abuse. Also, encourage the participants to keep the characteristics of an abuser and the signs of an abusive, of the signs of abuse in victims handy, because sometimes you see something and you kind of think, well, is that? I'm not sure. So you'll actually have that, and that is in their participants manual. So encourage them to keep that in a place where they can find it. And then, as Gil mentioned, in the theological framework, remind the participants that even though abusers should be held accountable, a community of engaged, supportive men will help prevent violence before it occurs, and I believe in some situations will help violence not occur again. So encouragement to be in accountability relationships so that abuse and violence does not occur. Finally, this session's homework, if you would, is to encourage men to look for ways that they can take a stand or step up. Encourage the men during the week before they come together for the last session to look for some ways, and maybe even try out some ways that they might make some of the comments that Gil shared with you. They may hear something inappropriate, and as hard as it may be, you can say to them, the person who's saying it, I don't find that useful, or whatever phrase you so choose to use.
Last week, we reviewed some of this with some of the leaders of our denomination. And one of the leaders came up to me privately and said, well, I have a problem with someone who is really under my, who I know personally. And it was a simple suggestion of, are they getting counseling? Is the woman getting counseling? He said, well, they're getting counseling together. And, just a simple comment of, well, you could help the situation by helping her find a time where she could get counseling separately in another setting that would be safe, because that would help. You'll be surprised as to how your knowledge now about this whole problem in our society will be helpful to other people as well.
Believe it or not, we're in the home stretch.
Yep.
This is session 8. Session 8 is totally a review session. The purpose of this session is to help review sections of each of the previous week's discussion. It can be done fairly quickly, and the purpose of this is really just to jog the participants' memories and encourage them to maybe have an opportunity to clarify anything that may still be kind of out there that's unanswered or unaddressed. There is an activity for personal reflection, and I would encourage you to engage the participants to delve deeply into their personal histories and the information that they've learned in this course, and honestly and vulnerably respond to the dialogue. One of the things that we learned as we piloted this study is giving the participants a homework assignment of looking at this activity ahead of time would be very helpful, because it will give them an opportunity to spend some time honestly kind of reflecting that the time that you have together in the session, you just wouldn't be able to do. It gives them several hours maybe to reflect, or several days, as opposed to several minutes that a 90-minute session would offer them. Then finally, there were 2 opportunities to provide input to the Amending Through Faith project. One is in the workbook, and in the facilitator's book, there is a website that we are asking our participants to go to and fill out some basic information to help us get some feedback on how we can improve the Amending Through Faith experience. Additionally, on the jump drive that has this information, there is a Word document that has a link that will take participants and facilitators to one additional survey site. We at the General Commission on United Methodist Men believe that all of our activities should promote and affect change in the participants. We never, as Gil mentioned at the beginning of this session today, we never want participants in a session for the sake of just participating. We hope that all that we do affects change in the lives of our participants, and maybe even the way that they think about certain issues and topics, domestic violence and violence against women and girls in this case. So if you would encourage the participants to take a few moments to fill out both of the surveys, that would be extremely helpful to us. Please know that in no way do we share or sell any information that we get from these surveys. We will hold that information totally confidential at the YWCA of Middle Tennessee, and also here at the General Commission on United Methodist Men. We have come to the conclusion, just maybe 2 other thoughts. You are about to embark on a life-changing experience, we believe. and we are here to resource you all the way through that process. On the screen in front of you, you have direct emails for both Gil and I here at the General Commission. Additionally, there is a phone number, 615-340-7145. That is our direct line to the General Commission. And we have jokingly said, really all you need to tell anybody who answers the phone is that you have questions about the AMEND project, and they will know exactly where to direct your phone call.